Client dinner tonight. Could run very late. Meredith delivered this announcement while adjusting her earrings in our bedroom mirror, the same pearl drops I'd given her for our 15th anniversary. She spoke with the casual authority of someone who'd made similar proclamations countless times before, framing the evening as professional necessity wrapped in client cultivation that apparently required dedicated attention extending beyond normal business hours. "Close the deal," I replied, injecting my voice with the supportive enthusiasm expected from a devoted husband invested in his wife's career success. 2 words carrying encouragement while my mind began constructing verification protocols that she couldn't possibly anticipate. William Blackwood, that's me, software engineer, 41 years old, possessing the particular combination of analytical thinking and persistent curiosity that makes my profession both lucrative and occasionally dangerous to those who prefer their deceptions unexamined. Meredith had married a man who solved problems for a living, though she seemed to have forgotten this inconvenient detail. "The Henderson account," she continued, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "You know how demanding they can be. Stephen thinks we can finally get them to commit to the full package if we handle this correctly." Stephen Harrington, her co-worker, account executive like herself at Morrison & Associates, the marketing firm where Meredith had climbed from junior associate to senior partner over the past 8 years. I'd met Stephen at company functions, charming in that effortless way that comes naturally to men who've never questioned their place in the world, entitled to attention and deference that others must earn through actual accomplishment. "Henderson Industries," I said, testing the waters. "Remind me what they manufacture again?" "Industrial components," she answered without hesitation, though I noticed she avoided eye contact while securing her watch clasp. "Boring stuff, really, but the contract value makes it worth the effort." I nodded with apparent satisfaction, though my mental database was already flagging inconsistencies. Henderson Industries had filed for bankruptcy protection 3 months ago, information readily available to anyone who bothered checking business news. Either Meredith was pursuing clients with questionable financial stability, or she was constructing elaborate fiction to justify evening plans that required alibis. "Take the BMW," I suggested. "Impression matters with clients like that." "Already planning on it." She kissed my cheek with the perfunctory affection of routine departure. "Don't wait up. These dinners can stretch past midnight when serious money's involved." The front door closed with its familiar click, followed by the BMW's engine starting in our driveway. I waited until the sound faded before moving to my home office, where 3 monitors displayed the various systems that comprised my professional and personal digital infrastructure. 23 minutes of investigation revealed what I'd suspected, but hoped not to confirm. Meredith's calendar showed no client dinner, her expense reports contained no restaurant reservations, and the Henderson account she claimed to pursue existed nowhere in Morrison & Associates' current client documentation. The deal she was supposedly closing had never been opened in the first place. My wife was lying to me with the practiced ease of someone who'd been constructing similar deceptions for longer than I cared to calculate. The logical response involved confrontation, discussion, perhaps counseling to address whatever marital issues had driven her toward dishonesty. But logic assumes good faith from all parties, and good faith had apparently departed our marriage without filing proper notice. Instead, I drove to Brookstone Florist and purchased 24 red roses, the variety Meredith favored for special occasions, along with a small card reading, "For my hard-working wife. Love, William." The florist wrapped them in elegant paper that rustled pleasantly as I carried them to my car. La Maison Bleue occupied a converted Victorian mansion in the city's historic district, the sort of establishment where serious business dinners occurred among crystal stemware and linen tablecloths. I'd made reservations there myself for client entertainment, understanding the psychology of environments that suggested success and stability. "Good evening," the hostess greeted me with professional warmth. "Do you have a reservation?" I'm looking for the Blackwood party, I explained, holding the roses prominently. My wife is dining with clients tonight, and I wanted to surprise her. The hostess consulted her computer screen with increasing confusion, scrolling through evening reservations with the thoroughness of someone who took customer service seriously. I'm sorry, but I don't see any reservation under Blackwood. Could it be under a different name? Try Henderson Industries, I suggested. It might be listed under the client's company. More scrolling, more confusion. No, nothing under Henderson either. Are you certain this is the correct restaurant? Absolutely certain. I maintained my expression of puzzled disappointment, while my eyes began scanning the dining room's dimly lit interior. Perhaps they're walk-ins. Table for 3 or 4, probably in a quiet section for business conversation. The hostess gestured helplessly. We're completely booked tonight with reservations. Walk-ins would be waiting at least 90 minutes for seating. My systematic visual search of the restaurant's layout identified couples, families, and business groups distributed among tables that offered varying degrees of privacy. The corner section provided the most seclusion, partially concealed by decorative screens that created intimate spaces for conversations requiring discretion. That's where I found them. Meredith sat across from Stephen Harrington at a table set for 2, not 3 or 4, as business dinners would require. Their hands were intertwined across white linen in the universal geometry of romantic rather than professional connection. Her laugh carried the musical quality reserved for moments of genuine pleasure, not the polite amusement she deployed during actual client entertainment. Stephen leaned forward with the confident posture of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, his wedding ring catching candlelight as his fingers traced patterns on Meredith's wrist. They were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to surrounding diners, and certainly unaware of the husband standing 20 feet away, holding roses that now felt like props in a production I hadn't auditioned for. My phone captured the tableau with digital precision, preserving evidence that memory might later question or denial might attempt to obscure. Multiple angles, clear faces, undeniable intimacy between two people who were definitely not discussing industrial components or contract negotiations. Confrontation in public spaces surrenders narrative control to witnesses who might sympathize incorrectly, creating scenes that generate gossip rather than resolution. I retreated through the restaurant's entrance, past the confused hostess who probably wondered why the flower delivery had gone so wrong. The drive home provided time to process what I'd witnessed and plan what came next. Some discoveries demand immediate reaction, others benefit from careful consideration and strategic response. Meredith had been planning this deception, constructing alibis and coordinating schedules with Stephen to create their romantic evening. They deserved a response that matched their level of preparation. I spent the remainder of the evening researching Morrison & Associates' employee handbook, specifically the sections addressing workplace relationships and professional conduct. Corporate policies exist for reasons that become relevant when personal behavior intersects with business operations, and Meredith's affair with Stephen created exactly the sort of liability that HR departments are designed to eliminate. Patricia Vance, Morrison & Associates Human Resources Director, had attended our company Christmas party 2 years ago. Professional, no nonsense, the type of executive who understood that workplace romance between colleagues in the same department created potential problems for everyone involved. I'd spoken with her briefly about software consulting opportunities, establishing the kind of casual business relationship that made future contact unremarkable. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a week beginning exactly as planned. Meredith left for work with her usual routine: coffee, toast, perfunctory goodbye kiss, betraying no awareness that her carefully constructed deception had been discovered and documented. She drove away in the BMW, probably anticipating another day of coordinating secret meetings with Stephen while maintaining professional facades for their colleagues. At 9:15, I called Patricia Vance's direct line. "Patricia, this is William Blackwood, Meredith's husband. We met at the Christmas party a couple years back. Of course, William. How can I help you? I have some information about a workplace situation that might concern your department. 2 employees who are violating company policy regarding personal relationships. Professional interest sharpened her voice. What kind of violation? Meredith and Stephen Harrington have been conducting an affair, including romantic dinners during claimed business hours. I have photographic evidence of their relationship, along with documentation showing they've been falsifying client meetings to cover their activities. Silence stretched across the connection while Patricia processed implications that extended beyond simple policy violations. Workplace affairs between married colleagues created legal exposure, potential harassment claims, and the sort of scandal that damaged company reputation when discovered by clients or competitors. "Can you email me the documentation?" she asked finally. "Sending it now." I attached the restaurant photos along with timeline evidence showing Meredith's false calendar entries and expense report discrepancies. You'll see they claim to be meeting with Henderson Industries, a company that filed bankruptcy 3 months ago. "I'll need to investigate this thoroughly," Patricia said. "Company policy requires immediate review when allegations involve senior staff members." "I understand. I'm not seeking any particular outcome, just making sure the company is aware of potential liability issues." The call ended with professional courtesy masking the earthquake that was about to reshape Morrison & Associates' personnel structure. Corporate investigations move with methodical efficiency when clear policy violations are documented with photographic evidence and financial records. But Meredith and Stephen weren't the only people whose lives were about to change dramatically. Jennifer Harrington answered her phone on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the distracted tone of someone managing multiple responsibilities simultaneously. Stephen's wife, mother of 2 teenage daughters, active in community organizations that relied on her organizational skills and social connections. "Mrs. Harrington, this is William Blackwood. I don't think we've met, but our spouses work together at Morrison & Associates." "Oh yes, Meredith mentions you occasionally. Is everything all right?" "I'm afraid I have some difficult information to share. Your husband and my wife have been having an affair. I discovered them at La Maison Bleue on Friday night, and I have photographs that confirm their relationship." The silence that followed contained the sound of a woman's world shifting beneath her feet, assumptions about marriage and fidelity crumbling in real time. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "Completely certain. I can email you the evidence if you'd like to see it, though I understand if you'd prefer not to." "Send it." Her voice hardened with the resolve of someone who needed facts rather than speculation. "Send everything you have." Monday afternoon brought the corporate reckoning that Patricia Vance had promised. Security escorts arrived at Morrison & Associates with the discreet efficiency of professionals who understood that workplace terminations required careful management to avoid scenes that might embarrass the company or create legal complications. Meredith called me at 3:47 p.m., her voice tight with panic and confusion. "William, something terrible has happened. Patricia Vance fired both Stephen and me. She claims we violated company policy, but we haven't done anything wrong. This is completely unfair." I let her words hang in the air for several seconds before responding with carefully measured calm. "What policy did she say you violated?" "Something about personal relationships between employees. But Stephen and I are just colleagues. We've never done anything inappropriate." "Where are you calling from?" "The parking garage. Security escorted us out like we were criminals. They wouldn't even let us clean out our desks properly. 15 years with this company, and they treat me like I'm some kind of threat." Her indignation carried the authentic outrage of someone who genuinely believed her deception had been flawless, that her careful alibis and professional facades had successfully concealed activities that were apparently obvious to anyone who bothered looking. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," I said. "These things usually get sorted out once everyone has a chance to review the facts. I need to come home. We need to talk about this. Something is very wrong here. Of course. Drive carefully. The BMW pulled into our driveway 23 minutes later, followed immediately by Stephen's silver Mercedes. Apparently, they'd decided to coordinate their response to the crisis that had destroyed both their careers in a single afternoon. I watched from our living room window as they sat in her car, engaged in animated conversation that involved considerable hand gesturing and what appeared to be mutual blame assignment. Two people who'd been so careful about concealing their affair that they'd never considered what would happen when their deception was discovered and documented. Meredith entered our house alone, leaving Stephen in the driveway like a problem she'd deal with later. Her face carried the shell-shocked expression of someone whose carefully ordered life had just collapsed without warning or explanation. "We need to talk," she announced, settling onto our couch with the exhausted posture of someone who'd spent the afternoon answering questions she couldn't answer honestly. "I'm listening." "Someone reported Stephen and me to HR. They claimed we were having some kind of inappropriate relationship, which is completely ridiculous. We're colleagues, nothing more. But Patricia Vance had photographs that made it look like we were doing something wrong." "Photographs of what?" "Us having dinner Friday night. But it was a business dinner, William. We were discussing the Henderson account, trying to close that deal I told you about." Her commitment to the lie was almost admirable in its persistence, even when the lie had already been exposed and destroyed her career. She was still constructing alibis for activities that no longer required concealment. "Henderson Industries filed bankruptcy 3 months ago," I said quietly. The color drained from her face as she realized her carefully prepared deception had just encountered an inconvenient fact that she couldn't explain away. "How do you know that?" "Because I looked it up. Because when my wife tells me she's having client dinners with companies that don't exist, I tend to investigate further." Understanding dawned slowly, like sunrise revealing a landscape that looked nothing like what she'd expected to find. "You reported us to Patricia Vance. I reported policy violations to the appropriate corporate authority. What happens next depends entirely on how you choose to handle the situation." Stephen's Mercedes was still running in our driveway, its owner probably wondering why his partner in deception was taking so long to emerge with damage control strategies. He was about to discover that some problems can't be solved with charm and entitlement. The neighborhood gossip network activated with the efficiency of a well-designed communication system, spreading news of the Morrison and Associates scandal through social media, coffee shop conversations, and the informal intelligence gathering that occurs when people who live in proximity begin sharing information about their neighbors' personal dramas. Jennifer Harrington proved to be a formidable opponent when properly motivated. Stephen's wife possessed the social connections and organizational skills that had made her effective in community leadership roles, and she deployed those same capabilities with devastating precision when her marriage became a casualty of workplace romance. Tuesday morning brought the first public confrontation. The Riverside Country Club hosted its monthly charity breakfast, an event that attracted the sort of people who conducted business and personal relationships among crystal stemware and imported coffee. Stephen attended these gatherings regularly, networking with potential clients while maintaining the social connections that supported his professional reputation. Jennifer arrived uninvited. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the dining room. "I'd like to introduce you to my husband, Stephen, who's been conducting an affair with his married colleague while lying to everyone about business dinners and client meetings." The confrontation that followed became the sort of public spectacle that social media was designed to amplify. Jennifer's detailed account of Stephen's deception, delivered with the calm authority of someone who'd done her research, transformed him from respected community member to cautionary tale in approximately 4 minutes. The video went viral by noon. Meredith's professional network began dissolving with similar efficiency. Morrison and Associates had issued a brief statement about personnel changes due to policy violations. But the marketing industry operates on relationships and reputation, and news of workplace affairs travels quickly among competitors who are always looking for talented staff members who might be available for recruitment. Except nobody wanted to hire executives who'd been terminated for conducting secret relationships and falsifying business expenses. "This is destroying everything we've worked for," Meredith said during one of our increasingly tense conversations. "Our reputation, our careers, our financial security. Someone is systematically ruining our lives." "Someone took photographs of you holding hands with Stephen at a romantic dinner," I corrected. "Everything that's happened since then has been the natural consequence of choices you made." "It was one mistake, William. One dinner that got misinterpreted by whoever was spying on us. This punishment doesn't fit the crime." Her version of events required believing that their affair consisted of a single dinner that had been innocently misunderstood, rather than an ongoing deception that had involved months of planning and coordination. The evidence suggested otherwise, but Meredith had committed to a narrative that minimized her culpability. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Nothing has been going on. Stephen and I are colleagues who had dinner to discuss business. That's all." "How long, Meredith?" The question hung between us like a challenge that she couldn't meet without abandoning her carefully constructed denial. She looked away, focusing on something beyond our living room window that apparently required intense concentration. "6 months," she whispered finally. 6 months of lying to me about client dinners and business meetings. 6 months of trying to figure out what I wanted from my life. Stephen understood things about me that you never bothered to learn. He made me feel appreciated in ways that you stopped providing years ago. The conversation was heading toward relationship counseling territory, exploring emotional needs and communication failures that might explain why a 15-year marriage had deteriorated into deception and infidelity. But understanding her motivations wouldn't change the fact that she'd chosen betrayal over honesty, or that her choices had consequences extending beyond our personal relationship. "What do you want to happen now?" I asked. "I want this nightmare to end. I want Stephen and me to get our jobs back, and I want whoever is sabotaging us to stop destroying our lives for entertainment." "And our marriage?" "I don't know." The admission carried exhausted honesty that cut through her previous attempts at manipulation. "I don't know if we can fix this, William. Too much has happened." At least we'd finally reached something resembling truth. Wednesday brought escalation from an unexpected source. Maya, our 14-year-old daughter, had been absorbing the tension that filled our house like toxic atmosphere, listening to heated phone conversations and witnessing the stress that was transforming both her parents into people she barely recognized. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question arrived during breakfast, delivered with the direct honesty that teenagers deploy when adult evasions become too obvious to ignore. "We're working through some problems," I said carefully. "Problems like Mom's boyfriend?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What do you know about that?" "Jenna's mom saw the video of Mrs. Harrington yelling at Mr. Harrington at the country club. She told Jenna, and Jenna told me. Everyone at school is talking about it." The realization that our family's private crisis had become public entertainment for Maya's classmates added another dimension to the situation that I hadn't anticipated. Teenagers are remarkably efficient at sharing gossip, and the children of Morrison and Associates employees attended the same schools, creating networks that ensured information traveled quickly between adult and adolescent social circles. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm angry," she said, with the fierce honesty that made her my daughter in ways that went beyond genetics. "Mom lied to both of us. She's been lying for months while pretending everything was normal. That's not okay." Maya's moral clarity cut through the complicated emotions and relationship dynamics that had been clouding my own judgment. Meredith hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd betrayed our family, lying to our daughter while conducting secret relationships that put our entire household stability at risk. "What happens next?" Maya asked. "I'm working on that." The answer satisfied her temporarily, but I knew she'd need more specific information soon. 14-year-olds deserve honesty about situations that affect their living arrangements and family structure, even when that honesty involves admitting that adult relationships can fail in spectacular and public ways. Thursday afternoon brought the next phase of social consequences. Brookfield Heights operated on the kind of community networks where reputation mattered for everything from school board elections to youth sports coaching positions. Meredith had been active in several organizations that relied on volunteer leadership, and those organizations began receiving information about her recent professional and personal difficulties. The PTA removed her from the fundraising committee. The tennis club suspended her membership pending review of her conduct. The book club simply stopped returning her calls. Social exile in suburban communities happens gradually, then suddenly, as people who once considered someone a friend begin treating them like a liability that might damage their own reputations through association. "This has to stop," Meredith said during another of our increasingly desperate conversations. "Someone is actively campaigning against Stephen and me, spreading information and encouraging people to punish us. This goes beyond what happened at work." "What kind of information?" "Details about our relationship, photographs from the restaurant, copies of our termination letters from Morrison and Associates. Someone is building a case against us and sharing it with everyone we know. Maybe Stephen's wife is angry about discovering her husband's affair. Jennifer couldn't have access to our employment records or internal company documents. This is someone with connections and resources who's determined to destroy us completely." Her paranoia was becoming more elaborate as the consequences of her choices continued expanding. Rather than accepting responsibility for decisions that had created these problems, she was constructing theories about conspiracies and persecution that cast her as a victim rather than someone whose deception had finally been exposed. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "We need to find out who's behind this campaign and make them stop. Stephen has a friend who works in private investigation. Maybe we can gather evidence about who's been spreading information about us." The idea that she wanted to investigate the investigation struck me as darkly amusing. Meredith and Stephen were planning to hire a private detective to discover the identity of whoever had exposed their affair and reported their policy violations to HR. "That sounds expensive," I said. "Stephen's handling the cost. He has resources that can help us figure out what's really going on here." Stephen's resources were about to encounter some unexpected complications. Friday evening brought surveillance of a different sort. Rob Martinez, my best friend since college and former police detective, had agreed to help with what he called counterintelligence operations. Rob possessed the professional skills and cynical worldview that made him effective at gathering information about people who thought they were being clever. "This is either brilliant or completely insane," he said, as we sat in his pickup truck outside Stephen's house. "I'm not sure which. Probably both." Stephen lived in Willowbrook Estates, the sort of planned community where houses were designed to suggest success and stability through architectural features that cost extra but served no practical purpose. His colonial revival home featured expensive landscaping and a 3-car garage that housed the Mercedes, a BMW SUV, and a vintage Corvette that he probably drove on weekends when he wanted to feel younger. "There's our boy," Rob said as Stephen emerged from his front door, carrying a briefcase and car keys. We followed at discreet distance through evening traffic toward downtown, maintaining the kind of surveillance that Rob had perfected during his years investigating insurance fraud and domestic disputes. Stephen drove with the confidence of someone who'd never considered that he might be the subject of investigation rather than the person conducting it. His destination surprised us both. The Brass Monkey occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, the sort of establishment that attracted people who needed to conduct conversations away from their usual social and professional circles. Stephen parked in the rear lot and entered through a side door that suggested familiarity with the venue's layout. "Interesting choice for a business meeting," Rob observed. We waited 15 minutes before following him inside. taking a corner table that offered clear sightlines to the bar area where Stephen sat with a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, wearing the kind of suit that suggested professional services rather than corporate employment, carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained documents requiring confidential discussion. "Private investigator," Rob said quietly. "I know the type." Their conversation lasted 47 minutes, involving considerable document exchange and what appeared to be detailed instructions about surveillance targets and information-gathering objectives. Stephen was indeed hiring professional help to discover who had exposed his affair and destroyed his career. The irony was almost perfect. "Can you get close enough to hear what they're discussing?" I asked. "Better than that." Rob produced a small electronic device from his jacket pocket. Directional microphone, police surplus. The technology that had once helped him gather evidence about insurance scams was about to reveal Stephen's plans for investigating his investigators. Rob adjusted the device's settings and aimed it toward their table with the casual precision of someone who'd done this many times before. "He wants background checks on you, your wife, and anyone else who might have access to Morrison & Associates' internal documents," Rob reported, "looking for connections that might explain how someone got photographs and employment records." "What kind of background checks?" "Financial records, social media activity, professional relationships, personal habits that might suggest vulnerability to blackmail or coercion. He's building profiles on potential suspects." Stephen was approaching this like a corporate investigation, using systematic research to identify whoever had disrupted his carefully planned affair. He clearly believed that discovering his opponent's identity would somehow provide leverage for reversing the consequences that had destroyed his career and marriage. "There's more," Rob continued. "He's asking about surveillance equipment, wanting to know if someone might have been following them or monitoring their communications." "Is he planning counter-surveillance?" "Sounds like it. He wants to know if their phones were hacked, if their cars were tracked, if their restaurant dinner was recorded rather than just photographed." The conversation was revealing Stephen's complete misunderstanding of what had happened to him. He was treating his exposure as a sophisticated intelligence operation rather than the simple consequence of conducting an affair in public places where observation was inevitable. "He's paying for a full investigation," Rob said. "Background checks, surveillance detection, digital forensics on their phones and computers. This guy is serious about finding out who destroyed his life." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks for preliminary results, longer for detailed analysis. But here's the interesting part. He's also asking about harassment and intimidation tactics. "What kind of tactics?" "Ways to pressure whoever exposed them into backing down. Nothing violent, but psychological pressure that might convince someone to stop their campaign against him." Stephen's investigation was evolving into retaliation planning, moving beyond simple information gathering toward active measures designed to neutralize his perceived enemies. He was planning to fight back against whoever had disrupted his affair, using professional resources to identify and intimidate them into submission. The meeting concluded with handshakes and business card exchanges that suggested ongoing professional relationships. Stephen left through the same side door he'd used for arrival, while his hired investigator remained at the bar to finish his drink and probably plan his approach to researching Stephen's list of potential suspects. "This is about to get complicated," Rob said as we followed Stephen back toward his neighborhood. "How complicated?" "He's hiring competent people who know how to gather information and apply pressure. If they figure out you're responsible for exposing his affair, they'll probably try to make your life difficult in ways that can't be traced back to Stephen." "What kind of ways?" "Employment problems, financial pressure, social harassment, legal complications that require expensive defense even when charges are eventually dropped. Professional intimidation designed to make you regret interfering with his personal life." We drove home through suburban streets that looked peaceful and ordinary, concealing the fact that several of their residents were now engaged in escalating conflict that involved private investigators, surveillance technology, and retaliation planning that could affect multiple families and careers. "What's our next move?" Rob asked. "We make sure Stephen's investigation finds exactly what we want it to find." "Which is?" "Evidence that points towards someone else entirely. Someone who has better reasons for wanting to destroy his life and more resources for conducting sophisticated surveillance operations." "You have someone in mind?" "Jennifer Harrington. Stephen's wife has plenty of motivation for exposing his affair, and she's been conducting her own campaign of social destruction since the country club incident. If his investigator concludes that she's responsible for everything that's happened, Stephen will have to deal with his wife rather than looking for external enemies. That's either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. The plan required careful execution, but the basic concept was elegant in its simplicity. Stephen was hiring professionals to discover who had destroyed his life, and those professionals were about to find evidence that his own wife was responsible for his downfall. Saturday morning brought preparation for what Rob called evidence-planting operations. The goal was creating a trail of information that would lead Stephen's investigator toward Jennifer Harrington while concealing any connection to my actual involvement in exposing the affair. "This requires thinking like a paranoid spouse," Rob explained as we reviewed our strategy. "Jennifer discovered the affair somehow, maybe through credit card statements or suspicious behavior, then hired her own investigator to gather evidence. How do we make that look convincing? Financial records showing payments to surveillance companies, digital evidence of her researching Stephen's activities, communication records that suggest she was building a case against him. The plan involved creating false evidence that would withstand professional investigation while pointing Stephen's hired detective toward conclusions that served our purposes. Jennifer had already demonstrated her willingness to publicly humiliate Stephen, making her a credible suspect for more sophisticated revenge operations. She's been destroying his reputation systematically," I said. "The country club confrontation, social media campaigns, spreading information about the affair throughout their community networks. Stephen's investigator will see a pattern of escalating retaliation that explains everything he's trying to understand. What about the Morrison and Associates leak? How would Jennifer get access to internal HR documents? Corporate connections. Her charity work involves networking with business leaders who might have relationships with Morrison and Associates executives. She could have used social connections to gather information about company policies and Stephen's employment status." Rob nodded approvingly. "That's actually plausible. Wealthy suburban wives have access to information networks that most people don't consider. The technical aspects of evidence creation required careful attention to detail. We needed to establish Jennifer's fictional investigation timeline, create digital breadcrumbs that suggested surveillance planning, and plant physical evidence that Stephen's detective would discover during his background research. "Bank records first," Rob said. "We need evidence that Jennifer hired professional services around the time she discovered the affair." "How do we create fake bank records?" "We don't. We create real transactions that look like surveillance payments, but actually involve legitimate services that Jennifer might have used for other purposes." The concept was elegant. Rather than forging documents, we would identify actual payments Jennifer had made to companies that could plausibly provide investigation services, then create context that made those payments appear suspicious when viewed through the lens of marital revenge. "Home security companies," I suggested. Jennifer might have upgraded their alarm system or installed cameras for legitimate reasons, but those same services could be used for surveillance planning. "Computer consulting firms. She might have needed technical support for personal devices, but Stephen's investigator could interpret those payments as evidence that she was researching digital surveillance techniques." We spent the morning identifying Jennifer's recent financial activity through public records and social media posts that revealed her various business relationships. The picture that emerged showed a woman with extensive professional networks and the resources to conduct sophisticated information gathering if properly motivated. "Legal consultation fees," Rob noted. reviewing county court records. She's been meeting with divorce attorneys, which makes sense given Stephen's affair, but it also suggests she was building a legal case that might require detailed evidence about his activities. Private banking services. She moved money between accounts recently, which could be interpreted as payment for confidential services that she wanted to keep separate from their joint finances. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling when assembled into a narrative that portrayed Jennifer as the architect of Stephen's downfall. Her public confrontation at the country club had been the culmination of a months-long investigation that included professional surveillance, corporate intelligence gathering, and systematic documentation of her husband's affair. Sunday afternoon brought the implementation phase. Rob's law enforcement contacts provided access to databases and communication systems that allowed us to plant digital evidence in locations where Stephen's investigator would eventually discover it. Anonymous tip lines, Rob explained as he worked at his laptop. Most private investigation firms maintain systems for receiving information about surveillance targets. We're going to send them details about Jennifer's activities that will redirect their investigation. What kind of details? Vehicle tracking data showing her car near Morrison and Associates on the day you called Patricia Vance. Cell phone location records placing her in the restaurant district when you discovered Stephen and Meredith's dinner. Financial transaction timestamps that correlate with key events in their exposure timeline. The beauty of the misdirection campaign was that most of the evidence was actually true. Jennifer had been in those locations at those times, conducting legitimate activities that could be reinterpreted as surveillance operations when viewed through the appropriate lens. Credit card records, I added. Jennifer used her card at a photography store 2 days before the country club confrontation. Stephen's investigator will assume she was purchasing surveillance equipment, but she was probably just getting family photos printed. Restaurant receipts. She had dinner at La Maison Bleue 3 weeks ago with friends, but the investigator will think she was conducting reconnaissance for the operation that exposed Stephen and Meredith. We created a comprehensive timeline that portrayed Jennifer as a sophisticated operator who had discovered her husband's affair through careful investigation, then orchestrated a revenge campaign that destroyed both Stephen's career and marriage. The evidence would withstand professional scrutiny because most of it was factually accurate, just interpreted through a framework that supported our preferred narrative. How long before Stephen's investigator discovers this information? I asked. 2 or 3 days for the digital evidence, maybe a week for the financial records analysis. Professional investigators are thorough, but they're also looking for patterns that confirm their working theories about who might be responsible. And Jennifer becomes the obvious suspect. Jennifer becomes the only logical suspect. She had motive, opportunity, and resources. Her public behavior since the affair was exposed demonstrates her willingness to destroy Stephen's reputation. Stephen's investigator will conclude that she's been planning this revenge operation for months. The plan required one final element to ensure its success. Stephen needed to discover evidence that appeared to confirm Jennifer's responsibility, while simultaneously making him believe that further investigation might expose him to additional retaliation. Escalation threat, Rob suggested. We need Stephen to think that Jennifer is planning even more damaging revelations if he continues trying to fight back. What kind of revelations? Financial irregularities in his consulting work, previous workplace relationships that might suggest a pattern of inappropriate behavior, personal information that could damage his reputation beyond repair. Does any of that actually exist? Doesn't matter. Stephen will believe it exists if he thinks Jennifer has been conducting comprehensive investigation into his background. The threat of exposure will be enough to make him back down rather than risk further escalation. Monday morning would bring the final phase of our misdirection campaign. Stephen's investigator was about to discover evidence that would redirect his entire investigation toward Jennifer Harrington, while Stephen himself would receive information suggesting that continued retaliation might result in even more damaging consequences than he'd already experienced. The irony was perfect. Stephen was paying professionals to investigate the person who had exposed his affair, and those same professionals were about to conclude that his own wife was responsible for destroying his life. Tuesday morning brought confirmation that our misdirection campaign had achieved its intended effect. Rob's monitoring of Stephen's communications revealed increasingly paranoid conversations with his hired investigator, discussing evidence that pointed toward Jennifer as the architect of his professional and personal destruction. "He's convinced she's been running surveillance on him for months," Rob reported. "The investigator found the digital breadcrumbs we planted, and Stephen is interpreting them as proof that Jennifer orchestrated everything from the restaurant discovery to the HR leak." How is he planning to respond? Direct confrontation. He wants to force Jennifer to admit her involvement and agree to stop her campaign against him. The irony was becoming almost too perfect to believe. Stephen was preparing to accuse his wife of conducting the exact investigation that had actually exposed his affair, while remaining completely unaware that his real opponent had been manipulating his investigation from the beginning. When is this confrontation happening? Tonight. Stephen is planning to present Jennifer with evidence of her surveillance activities and demand that she cease all retaliation efforts. What kind of evidence? Financial records, location data, communication logs, everything we planted to make her look responsible. His investigator compiled it into a comprehensive report that makes Jennifer appear to be a sophisticated operator who's been planning revenge for months. The confrontation would occur at their home in Willowbrook Estates, where Stephen intended to leverage his supposed evidence to regain control of a situation that had been spiraling beyond his management since the Morrison and Associates termination. Meanwhile, Meredith was dealing with her own escalating consequences. The social exile that had begun with professional termination was expanding into complete community rejection, as neighbors and former friends continued distancing themselves from association with the affair scandal. "No one will return my calls," she complained during one of our increasingly tense conversations. "People I've known for years are treating me like I have some kind of contagious disease." "Adultery tends to make people uncomfortable," I observed. "This goes beyond normal social judgment, William. Someone is actively encouraging people to shun Stephen and me. They're spreading information and coordinating a community-wide campaign to isolate us." Her paranoia was expanding to match Stephen's, creating elaborate theories about organized persecution rather than accepting that their behavior had natural consequences that didn't require external coordination. "What do you think is really happening?" I asked. "I think Jennifer Harrington is using her social connections to destroy us systematically. She's been spreading gossip, sharing private information, and pressuring people to choose sides in her war against Stephen. Have you talked to Stephen about this?" "He's been investigating the situation. He hired a private detective to find out who's been targeting us, and apparently Jennifer has been conducting surveillance operations for months." "Surveillance operations? Following us? Monitoring our activities, gathering evidence about our relationship. Stephen thinks she discovered the affair weeks before the restaurant incident, then planned everything that's happened since." Meredith was accepting Stephen's investigator's conclusions without question, believing that Jennifer's fictional surveillance campaign explained all the consequences they'd experienced. The misdirection was working perfectly, redirecting their attention towards Stephen's wife while concealing my actual involvement. What happens next? Stephen is confronting Jennifer tonight. He has evidence of her activities, and he's going to demand that she stop her campaign against us. What if she denies everything? The evidence is overwhelming. Financial records, location data, communication logs that prove she's been running sophisticated surveillance operations. Jennifer won't be able to deny facts that are documented in official records. The conversation revealed how completely Stephen and Meredith had accepted the false narrative we'd constructed. They were convinced that Jennifer was responsible for their downfall, and they were planning retaliation based on evidence that had been carefully fabricated to support that conclusion. Wednesday evening brought the confrontation that would determine whether our misdirection campaign achieved its ultimate objective. Rob and I positioned ourselves near the Harrington residence to observe the encounter that Stephen had been planning since discovering his investigator's report. "This could go very badly," Rob warned as we watched Stephen's Mercedes pull into his driveway. "Confronting someone based on fabricated evidence tends to create unpredictable situations. Jennifer doesn't know the evidence is fabricated. She'll think Stephen actually discovered her involvement in exposing his affair." "What involvement?" "Jennifer wasn't involved in anything except reacting to information she received from an anonymous source." "But Stephen doesn't know that. His investigator convinced him that Jennifer orchestrated everything, and he's planning to use that supposed evidence to force her into submission." The confrontation began immediately after Stephen entered his house, carrying the briefcase that contained his investigator's report. Through the living room windows, we could see animated conversation that quickly escalated into heated argument as Stephen presented his evidence, and Jennifer responded with what appeared to be shocked denial. "She's not backing down," Rob observed. "Jennifer is fighting back rather than accepting his accusations. Because she knows she didn't conduct any surveillance operations. Stephen is accusing her of activities that she never performed based on evidence that was manufactured to frame her." The argument continued for nearly an hour, involving considerable document examination and what appeared to be detailed discussion of financial records and timeline evidence. Jennifer was clearly defending herself against accusations that she couldn't understand, while Stephen was becoming increasingly frustrated with her refusal to admit guilt that his evidence seemed to prove. "This is about to explode," Rob said, as their voices became audible through the windows. "You hired investigators to follow me?" Jennifer's voice carried clearly across their front yard. "You violated our privacy to gather evidence for your paranoid theories?" "I hired professionals to discover who destroyed my career and marriage," Stephen shouted back. "And they found conclusive proof that you've been running surveillance operations for months." "I don't know anything about surveillance operations. I discovered your affair because you were careless with your phone messages, not because I hired private detectives. The evidence proves otherwise. Financial records, location data, communication logs, everything documented by professionals who know how to investigate these situations." Their argument was revealing the fundamental flaw in our misdirection campaign. Jennifer's genuine ignorance of any surveillance activities was making her defense more convincing than Stephen's manufactured evidence, creating doubt about conclusions that his investigator had presented as factual certainties. "What evidence?" Jennifer demanded. "Show me these financial records that supposedly prove I hired surveillance companies. Bank transfers to security consulting firms, payments to computer specialists, legal consultation fees that correlate exactly with the timeline of our exposure. Those were legitimate business expenses that have nothing to do with investigating your affair. You're creating conspiracy theories based on normal financial transactions." The confrontation was reaching the critical moment where Stephen would either accept Jennifer's denials or escalate his accusations beyond the point of rational discussion. His investment in the false narrative was too significant to abandon without overwhelming proof that his investigator had been wrong. "The location data proves you were conducting surveillance," he insisted. "You were near Morrison and Associates when someone called HR about our relationship. You were in the restaurant district when someone photographed us having dinner." "I was conducting normal activities in public places. That doesn't constitute surveillance operations. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. The pattern exists only in your imagination and whatever report you paid someone to fabricate." Jennifer's defense was undermining Stephen's confidence in evidence that had seemed conclusive when presented by his hired investigator. The confrontation was forcing him to choose between accepting that he'd been deceived by professionals he'd trusted or escalating his accusations against a wife who was clearly telling the truth about her innocence. "This conversation is over," Jennifer announced. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I'm requesting a restraining order to prevent further harassment based on your paranoid fantasies. You can't divorce me for investigating your criminal surveillance activities. I can divorce you for conducting an affair, hiring private investigators to harass me, and making false accusations based on manufactured evidence. The confrontation concluded with Jennifer's departure from their house, carrying luggage that suggested permanent separation rather than temporary cooling-off period. Stephen's attempt to regain control through intimidation had backfired completely, accelerating the dissolution of his marriage while failing to achieve any of his intended objectives. "Well, that went about as badly as possible," Rob observed, as we watched Jennifer drive away in the BMW SUV. "Actually, it went perfectly." "How do you figure? Stephen's marriage just exploded, Jennifer is filing for divorce and restraining orders, and he still doesn't know who actually exposed his affair. But he's stopped looking for external enemies. Stephen is now focused on defending himself against Jennifer's legal actions rather than investigating who destroyed his career. The misdirection campaign achieved its primary objective, which was making Stephen's problems too complicated and expensive to solve through retaliation against whoever exposed his affair. He's now dealing with divorce proceedings, restraining order hearings, and legal defense costs that will consume all his attention and resources. What about Meredith? Meredith will have to choose between supporting Stephen through his legal battles or distancing herself from association with someone whose situation is becoming increasingly desperate. The plan was reaching its conclusion with mathematical precision. Stephen and Meredith's affair had destroyed their careers, marriages, and social standing, while their attempts at retaliation had only created additional problems that required expensive legal defense. Thursday morning brought confirmation that Jennifer was following through on her threats. Divorce papers were filed in county court, along with restraining order requests that cited harassment, surveillance, and intimidation tactics as grounds for legal protection. Stephen's situation was now completely untenable. His affair had cost him his job, his wife was divorcing him for accusations he couldn't prove, and his attempts at investigation had only created evidence of his own paranoid behavior that would be used against him in court proceedings. "It's over," Meredith announced during our final conversation about the situation. "Stephen's legal problems are too complicated for me to handle. I can't be associated with someone who's facing restraining order hearings and divorce proceedings based on surveillance accusations." "What does that mean for your relationship?" "We're ending it. Stephen is too damaged by everything that's happened, and I need to focus on rebuilding my own life rather than supporting someone whose situation is hopeless." "And our marriage?" "I think we both know that's over too, William. Too much has happened for us to go back to the way things were." The admission carried finality that eliminated any remaining uncertainty about our future. Meredith was accepting responsibility for choices that had destroyed our family, while acknowledging that some damage couldn't be repaired through apology or counseling. "Maya deserves better than parents who can't trust each other," she continued. "I'll find somewhere else to live, and we can work out custody arrangements that minimize disruption to her routine. I think that's probably best." Friday afternoon brought the conclusion I'd been working toward since discovering Meredith's affair at La Maison Bleue. Stephen's Mercedes appeared in our driveway one final time, but instead of confident arrival, his approach carried the defeated posture of someone whose carefully planned life had collapsed beyond any possibility of reconstruction. "I know it was you," he said when I answered our front door. "I'm sorry?" "The restaurant surveillance, the HR leak, the evidence that destroyed our careers. Jennifer wasn't responsible for any of it. You orchestrated everything." "That's an interesting theory." "My investigator was wrong about Jennifer, but the surveillance evidence was real. Someone was following us, photographing our activities, gathering information about our relationship. Someone with resources and motivation for destroying our lives." "What do you want, Stephen?" "I want you to know that you won. Meredith is ending our relationship, Jennifer is divorcing me, and I'm facing legal costs that will probably bankrupt me. Your revenge was more thorough than I thought possible. I'm sorry things didn't work out for you." "No, you're not. You planned every aspect of this destruction, and you're satisfied with the results." His assessment was accurate, though I wasn't planning to confirm his conclusions. Stephen had finally figured out who was responsible for exposing his affair, but the knowledge was useless because he lacked any evidence that could support retaliation or legal action. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I try to rebuild whatever's left of my life, while you enjoy your victory." Stephen's departure marked the end of a campaign that had achieved every objective I'd established when discovering Meredith's betrayal. Their affair had cost them their careers, marriages, social standing, and financial security, while my own involvement remained completely concealed from any scrutiny that might create consequences. The deal was closed, with interest compounded daily until the final payment had been extracted from both parties who thought they could deceive me with romantic dinners disguised as business meetings. Some negotiations require patience, strategic thinking, and the willingness to let opponents destroy themselves through their own poor decisions. Stephen and Meredith had provided all the evidence I needed. I'd simply made sure the right people received that evidence at the optimal time for maximum impact. Maya found me in our kitchen that evening, reviewing documents that would formalize our new family structure. "Are you okay, Dad?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "Good. Mom made some really bad choices, but you handled everything the right way." "What makes you say that?" "You didn't get angry or do anything stupid. You just made sure the truth came out, and then you let other people decide how to respond to what they learned." Her analysis was remarkably sophisticated for someone her age, but Maya had always possessed the kind of moral clarity that cut through adult complications to identify fundamental principles. "Sometimes the truth is enough," I agreed. "More than enough, apparently." We spent the evening planning our future as a smaller family unit, discussing practical arrangements and emotional adjustments that would be necessary as Meredith transitioned to her new life. The conversation was easier than I'd expected, probably because Maya had already processed the situation with typical teenage efficiency. "Will you miss her?" Maya asked. "I'll miss the person I thought she was, but I won't miss wondering whether she was telling me the truth about where she was going or who she was meeting." "That makes sense." "What about you?" "I'm disappointed in her choices, but I'm not surprised by the consequences. Actions have results, and she chose actions that had predictable results." Maya's assessment summarized the entire situation with mathematical precision. Meredith and Stephen had chosen deception over honesty, believing they could maintain their affair without consequences, and they'd discovered that some choices create problems that compound beyond any possibility of management or control. The flowers I'd purchased for Meredith's supposed client dinner were still in our refrigerator, preserved in crystal water that had kept them fresh throughout the campaign that destroyed her relationship with Stephen. I threw them away without sentiment, along with other reminders of a marriage that had ended the moment she'd chosen to lie about her evening plans. Some deals close successfully when all parties negotiate in good faith toward mutually beneficial outcomes. Others reveal that the parties were negotiating in bad faith from the beginning, their professional and personal losses compounding into bankruptcy that neither anticipated. Meredith had said she was closing a deal that night at La Maison Bleue. She was right about that much. The deal was closed, with interest that had accumulated for 6 months of deception, paid in full through consequences that would follow both participants for years to come. Maya and I ordered pizza and watched movies until late evening, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a household where everyone told the truth about their plans and nobody needed to construct alibis for activities that required concealment. Some victories are measured